Hey friends, welcome back to the Irony Shelf. Tonight we continue Volume 2 with the Schartz-Metterklume Method. The English countryside has long been receptive to new continental ideas. But for a traveller with sharp wits and sharper boredom, a simple case of mistaken identity can be a golden opportunity to have some fun. Now, fix up a hock and seltzer and meet the strategic Provocateur. In the sweltering summer of 1911, all of West Berkshire seems to hold its breath. On a small country platform, the only sound is the rhythmic, metallic tink, tink, tink of cooling iron as the engine settles into the sidings. The air under the station eaves is a dense, suffocating mix of coal smoke, hot oil, and the sweet, cloying scent of parched grass from the fields beyond. The lethargy of the place is only broken by the lazy buzz of a horsefly and the distant, dry crunch of gravel under a station master's boots. Here, the uninteresting length of the wooden planks feels like an island of forced patience in a sea of summer heat. But just past the station's edge, where the shadows of the eaves end, the atmosphere shifts. The smell of oil gives way to the sharp, acidic tang of sun-baked dirt, and the heavy, musky scent of a labouring animal. As the dust rises in slow, golden plumes from the roadway, you realise that the stillness is about to be broken, not by the train's whistle, but by the crisp, uncompromising heels of a woman who refuses to wait for the world to move on its own. And here, dear listener, we begin our story. Lady Carlotta stepped out onto the platform of the small country station and paced up and down its uninteresting length, waiting until the train was ready to proceed on its way. Then, looking toward the dirt road just past the station, she saw a horse struggling with a crushing load. At the horse's side was a driver, of the sort that seems to bear a sullen hatred against the animal that helps him to earn a living. Lady Carlotta promptly marched out to the roadway and took command of the situation. Her friends frequently lectured her against interfering on behalf of a distressed animal, insisting that such interference was none of her business. Only once had she put the doctrine of non-interference into practice. On that occasion, one of its most vocal advocates had been trapped for nearly 3 hours in a small and extremely uncomfortable hawthorn tree by an angry wild boar. Lady Carlotta, on the other side of the fence, had continued with the watercolour sketch she was painting, and refused to interfere between the boar and his prisoner. It is very likely that she lost the friendship of the lady once she was finally rescued. On this occasion, however, she merely lost the train, which finally showed a sign of impatience and steamed off without her. She accepted being left behind with calm indifference. Her friends and relations were quite accustomed to her luggage arriving without her. She sent a vague telegram to her destination to say that she was coming on by another train. Before she had time to think what her next move might be, she was approached by an imposingly dressed lady who seemed to be taking a slow, silent inventory of her clothes and appearance. "You must be Miss Hope, the governess I've come to meet," said this imposing figure, in a tone that allowed no room for disagreement. "Very well. If I must, I must," said Lady Carlotta to herself, with dangerous meekness. "I am Mrs. Quabarl," continued the lady, And where, might I ask, is your luggage? It's gone astray, said the supposed governess, relying on the useful rule that the absent are always to blame. In reality, her luggage had acted exactly as it should have. I've just telegraphed about it, she added, which was much closer to the truth. How provoking, said Mrs. Quabarl. These railway companies are so careless. However, my maid can lend you what you need for the night, and she led the way to her car. During the drive to the Quabarl mansion, Lady Carlotta was given a grand introduction to the responsibilities that had been thrust upon her. She learned that Claude and Wilfred were delicate, sensitive souls, that Irene had a highly developed artistic temperament, and that Viola was some other type, just as common among children of that class at the turn of the century. I wish them not only to be taught, said Mrs. Quabarl, but to be truly engaged by their studies. In their history lessons, for instance, you must try to make them feel that they are being introduced to the life stories of men and women who really lived, not merely memorizing a list of names and dates. I shall also expect you to speak French at meals, several days in the week. I shall speak French 4 days of the week, and Russian on the other 3. Russian? My dear Miss Hope, no one in the house speaks or understands Russian. That will not bother me in the least, said Lady Carlotta, coldly. Mrs. Quabarl, to use a colloquial expression, was knocked off her perch. She was one of those people who appear magnificent and bossy, only as long as they are not seriously opposed. The slightest show of unexpected resistance is enough to leave them timid and defensive. When the new governess failed to express any admiration for the large, expensive new car, and mentioned several better models that had just been put on the market, her employer's embarrassment became almost pitiful. Her feelings were like those of an ancient general watching his massive war elephant being chased off the battlefield by a few slingers and javelin throwers. At dinner that evening, even though she was joined by her husband, who usually echoed her every opinion and provided her moral support, Mrs. Quabarl failed to regain any of her lost ground. The governess not only poured herself a generous glass of wine, but spoke with authority on the subject of vintages, regions, and the finer points of cellarage, subjects on which the Quabarls had no knowledge of their own to offer. Previous governesses had carefully avoided the subject of wine, proffering a respectful and possibly sincere preference for water. But when this one went so far as to recommend a specific wine merchant, whose reputation was beyond reproach, Mrs. Quabarl decided it was time to steer the conversation toward safer, more conventional topics. We received very satisfactory references about you from the clergyman. Canon Teep, she observed, a very admirable man, I should think. Drinks like a fish and beats his wife, said the governess with total indifference. Otherwise, a very lovable character. My dear Miss Hope, I trust you are exaggerating, gasped the Quabarls in unison. One must, in all fairness, admit that there is some provocation, continued the storyteller. Mrs. Teep is the most irritating bridge player that I have ever sat down with. Her poor play at the card table certainly justifies some amount of roughness of manner from her partner. But to douse her completely with the contents of the only soda-water bottle in the house, on a Sunday afternoon, when one couldn't get another, shows a lack of regard for the comfort of others, which I cannot altogether overlook. You may think me hasty in my judgments, but it was strictly because of that soda-water incident that I left. "We will talk of this some other time," said Mrs. Quabarl hastily. "I shall never speak of it again," said the governess, with decision. Mr. Quabarl made a welcome diversion by asking what studies the new teacher planned to start the next morning. "History, to begin with," she informed him. "Ah, history," he observed. "Now, in teaching them history, you must take care to engage their interest. You must make them feel that they are being introduced to the life stories of men and women who really lived." "I've told her all that," interrupted Mrs. Quabarl. "I teach history, using the Schartz-Metterklume Method," said the governess loftily. "Ah, yes," said her listeners, deciding it was best to pretend they knew the name. "What are you children doing out here?" demanded Mrs. Quabarl the next morning. She found Irene sitting gloomily at the head of the stairs, while her sister Viola was huddled in miserable silence on the window seat, nearly buried under a wolf-skin rug. "We are having a history lesson," came the unexpected reply. "I am supposed to be Rome, and Viola is the she-wolf, not a real one, but the statue the Romans used to honour. Claude and Wilfrid have gone to capture the shabby women." "The shabby women?" "Yes, they've got to carry them off. They didn't want to, but Miss Hope grabbed one of Father's sports bats and threatened them with a number 9 spanking if they didn't. So they've gone to do it." A loud, angry screaming from the lawn sent Mrs. Quabarl rushing there at once, fearing the punishment was already being handed out. However, the noise came from the 2 small daughters of the lodger's caretaker. They were being dragged and pushed toward the house by the panting and dishevelled Claude and Wilfrid, whose task was made even more difficult by the incessant, if ineffective, blows of the girl's small brother. The governess, bat in hand, sat negligently on the stone railing, watching the scene with the cold impartiality of a goddess of war. A furious and repeated chorus of "I'll tell mother" rose from the captive children. But their mother, who was hard of hearing, was busy at her wash-tub, and noticed nothing. After an anxious glance toward the lodge, the caretaker's wife was known for a fierce temper that often accompanies deafness. Mrs. Quabarl rushed over in a fury to rescue the struggling captives. "Wilfrid, Claude, let those children go at once. Miss Hope, what on earth is the meaning of this scene?" "Early Roman history, the rape of the Sabine women. Don't you know?" said the governess. "It's the Schartz-Metterklume Method. Children understand history by acting it out themselves. It fixes the facts in their memory. Of course, if, thanks to your interference, your boys go through life thinking the Sabine women escaped, I really cannot be held responsible." "You may be very clever and modern, Miss Hope," said Mrs. Quabarl firmly, "but I should like you to leave here by the next train. Your luggage will be sent off to you as soon as it arrives." "I'm not certain exactly where I shall be for the next few days," said the dismissed governess. "You might keep my luggage until I send my address. There are only a couple of trunks, some golf clubs, and a leopard cub." "A leopard cub?" gasped Mrs. Quabarl. Even in her departure, this extraordinary person seemed destined to leave a trail of chaos behind her. "Well, it's hardly a cub any more. It's more than half grown, you know. A chicken every day and a rabbit on Sundays is what it usually gets. Raw meat makes it too excitable. Don't trouble about the car for me. I'm more inclined for a walk." And with that, Lady Carlotta strode out of the Quabarl's lives. Forever. The arrival of the genuine Miss Hope, who had simply mistaken the date she was supposed to arrive, caused a chaos that the poor lady was quite unaccustomed to inspiring. It was now obvious that the Quabarl family had been completely fooled, though they felt a certain relief to know the truth. "How tiresome for you, dear Carlotta," said her hostess. "How very tiresome, missing your train and having to stay overnight in a strange place." "Oh, not at all," said Lady Carlotta with a smile. "It wasn't tiresome, not for me." And here, dear listener, we conclude our reading of the Schartz-Metterklume Method, written by Saki and respectfully adapted for the modern listener. Before he was a celebrated short story writer, Hector Hugh Munro, the man behind the pen name of Saki, was a highly respected political satirist and foreign correspondent for the Morning Post. Stationed in places like Warsaw, St. Petersburg, and the Balkans, he witnessed firsthand the rise of modern political maneuvering and the theatre of diplomacy. This professional background allowed him to view social interactions as a delicate series of maneuvers where a well-placed word or a new persona could change the energy of an entire room. The Schartz-Metterklume Method first appeared in the pages of the Westminster Gazette, as seen here, on October 14th, 1911. This was a pivotal year for Saki, as he was refining Lady Carlotta as the clever, independent woman who uses her wits to dismantle the pomposity of the middle class. While the name sounds impressively Teutonic and academic, it is a complete linguistic fabrication. By inventing a name that sounded vaguely like a hybrid of Schwartz and Metternich, Saki was playfully deriding the English tendency to be easily impressed and intimidated by anything that sounded like a rigorous European intellectual system, particularly those emerging from Germany and Switzerland. This story was later collected in Saki's 1914 masterpiece, Beasts and Super Beasts. In the collection, it stands as a companion piece to The Open Window, with both stories exploring how a romancer at short notice can completely upend a traditional English household. Now, as we close the book on Lady Carlotta, if you too find a certain charm in the art of the ironic and the unexpected, we invite you to subscribe and join us. It is your support that allows the Irony Shelf to regularly curate these volumes. Thank you for listening. I look forward to sharing our next story with you very soon.